Hey, Sleepy Sheepy here. Today we're going to be looking at a level 100 dexterity build using two lightning katanas. So we're going to use the lightning Nagakiba as well as the Dragonscale Blade, and we may be switching over to dual Dragonscale Blades depending on the situation. For this build we'll be putting 50 points into Vigor, 22 into Endurance, we'll have 18 Strength, which is required for the Nagakiba, and then we'll do 57, well it'll actually be 54 into Dexterity, but we'll have the Okina Mask, which gives us 3 more points in Dexterity. So that's an optional way to set up this build. I went that route just for a little bit more dexterity, but you want to note that it does lower your focus. So if you're encountering any sleep buildup or madness buildup, you'll probably want to put on the clarifying horn charm and either switch to a different helm or just remove it entirely so that you don't get procced by sleep or madness too quick. The rest of the armor that we're going to be using is going to be the Beast Champion armor, as well as the Tree Sentinel gauntlets and greaves, and then we'll also use the Great Jar's Arsenal, Bulgo Talisman, and Crimson Amber Medallion +2. And then we have the Shard of Alexander on because we have Unsheath as our Ash of War for the Nagakiba, but if you are switching over to the Dragonscale Blade, you're probably going to want to change this to something like the Claw Talisman or Millicent's Prosthesis, just because you're unlikely to land this Ash of War too consistently, and the damage output isn't going to be insanely high. So Shard of Alexander makes more sense for the Ash of War Unsheath than the Lightning sword Ash of War associated with the Dragonscale Blade. We'll be running the Lightning Shroud and Crack tier as well as the Crimson Bubble tier. I think the Lightning Shroud and Crack tier makes more sense than the Dexterity Knot, just because the 10 points to Dexterity aren't going to raise our AR that much, and both of our weapons are going to have the potential to be Lightning infused. So the Nagakiba is already Lightning infused, and then we'll be buffing our Dragonscale Blades with the Ice Lightning Sword Ash of War, which does get them some nice lightning bonus. So together, I think these two make the most sense, but you could switch it up if you wanted to. The moveset for this build is going to be pretty straightforward. It's just the normal dual katana setup, so you're going to have all your regular light attacks associated with your main hand, and then you're going to get some staggered slashes for most of the light chain. The last attack is going to be two sword attacks simultaneously, which is kind of nice, but for the most part, I found that the main hand weapon was going to be a little bit faster and a little bit more reliable in terms of landing hits. However, it's worth noting that the crouching attack comes out quickly and with both weapons simultaneously, and the jumping attack for the L1 is going to be pretty strong as well. So I would say if you are trying to maximize damage in a single hit, going for something like crouching attacks or jumping attacks is going to be a pretty strong way to approach that. But if you're going for chip damage or just kind of consistency with landing moves, I would say using the one-handed moveset is going to be the way to go. As for our Ashes of War, we'll be using the Nagakiba for the most part in multi-opponent situations. Especially at this level, the damage output is a lot higher than 80, and you're more likely to just kind of get chunked and blendered by a group of 3. So having something like Unsheath on this weapon is going to be extremely helpful in terms of just taking care of one opponent early on. And then once it's a one-on-one situation, I think that's where the dual moveset associated with the dual Dragonscale Blades can really shine. So our approach will usually be to just put a buff on our offhand weapon and then switch over. And that way we'll have lightning damage on both and can utilize the Unsheath Ash of War, which is really just very strong, especially with this setup that we've got. So this is my approach for this particular build, and you can vary it, but I found it to yield some pretty good results. That pretty much covers everything that I wanted to say about the moveset and the build that we'll be using. If you wouldn't mind considering subscribing, that would be really awesome. I am trying to hit 1,000 subscribers. But yeah, let's just go ahead and jump into the invasions. Alright, so jumping into this first invasion, we're going to have a 3v1, and this is all going to take place in water, which is going to be beneficial for the lightning damage that we're going to be doing, because water will lower our opponent's resistances to lightning. So we have somebody with the Star Fists, which they're doing a decent job with them. I definitely like that weapon a lot, and it's nice if you can try to bait your opponents into an attack. So standing in one spot and continuously going for attacks is typically a good strategy, but it mostly works on aggressive opponents, so it's better, I would say, if you're an invader rather than the one being invaded, because I'm going to be playing a little bit more passively just to make sure that I take fewer hits in the process. So there I'm able to get the Unsheathe Ash of War and take out one opponent, and then a jumping attack and take out the other. And then we'll see the host here takes care of the PvE real quick, but they are using the Envoy Horn, which is not bad in terms of damage output if you are swinging the weapon, but you are going to be stuck in a pretty long animation if you go for the Ash of War. So they, I don't know, make some questionable decisions in terms of when they use the Envoy Horn, and that gives me some time to apply my buffs that are both going to be doing extra lightning damage as well as get a backstab on the Envoy Horn Ash of War. So now the chase down process begins, and I'm able to land a jumping attack just with a slight delay between when I jump and when I hit L1. So that was pretty useful there. And then next up we have another 3v1. This one confused me a little bit just because I kill the first opponent, and then here I think that I'm dealing with the host. Their talisman to look like the host definitely is working on me in this instance, and I double buff and just get the extra lightning damage on the Dragonscale Blade. So you can see here that these do pretty substantial damage. 772 on a level 100 build off a jumping attack, and there's probably a little bit of extra damage there to be had, but eventually I do realize that that was not the host, and I go for a chase down on the actual host here. This person was playing pretty passively. I think they didn't really want to fight, but I kind of just wanted to include the end here for just completion of the invasion, and we're able to get some hits with the staggered L1s, and then a couple of running attacks, just kind of varying between the two to throw off our opponent a little bit in the process. Next up we have another 3v1, and this one was kind of funny. There was a lot of Dragon Breath spam, also some free aims with the Freezing Pot, which judging the distance can be a little bit of a challenge when you're on an incline, but I kind of bait them into a sense of security that I'm going to be continuously running away, and then they go for Dragon Breath when they're just a little bit too close, which means I can run in and get my Ash of War off, and you can see there Unsheathe just does very substantial damage. For me personally, I like using the heavy attack version of Unsheathe. I think it delivers a little bit more damage and is fairly consistent. It's also a solid roll catch, and you get the vertical slash, which can be nice if your opponent is going to try to do a jumping attack into you. So if you go for the horizontal light attack version of Unsheathe, you're more likely to have somebody jump over you, but it is useful in an instance where you're trying to hit multiple opponents. Eventually there I do land the Ash of War with the Dragonscale Blade though, which I found to be fairly difficult, and that was one of the reasons that I chose to use the Nagakiba in my main hand, was just not having an Ash of War, especially at this rune level where, rune level 100 can invade 125, which means you have meta level players with their summons, and not having an Ash of War that is reliable can be a pretty big detriment. So this next one is going to be a 3v1, and honestly I should be calling it a 3v2 because this rune bear just jumps in kind of out of nowhere. I've baited the opponents into this space, and the rune bear definitely becomes a really useful ally here. So right now I was kind of just waiting for the effect that prevents me from healing to wear off. You can see right there I go for a heal and it's not quite worn off yet, but then I am able to get some health in there. One of the phantoms gets kind of grabbed by the rune bear and gets a lot of damage taken. So I begin a chase down process on this blue here, and I'm getting hit by the rune bear. This is like probably one of the most chaotic invasions that I've experienced. So I'm not even entirely sure what happens to the blue throughout this invasion. I think they get killed by the rune bear, but I don't see it happen. So at a certain point I switch and start going for the phantom. I almost managed to get them, and they get it kind of stuck into this corner and do a great job of rolling at the appropriate times. I miss with multiple L1s, and even though I was trying to stagger them, I think they did a good job of not panic rolling. But either I hit them or the rune bear hits them there, and that chunks them for quite a bit of health. And then the chase down process begins again, and I'm able to get a quick light attack in with the Nagakiba. So that worked out pretty well. I almost died. I was probably down to like 20 HP or something, and it's now finally a 1-on-1, well, maybe a 2-on-1 if you count the bear, and eventually the rune bear gets the finishing touch there. So I had a lot of fun with that particular invasion. I thought it was extremely chaotic and just, you know, a nice PvE teammate for once, even if they did do some damage in the process. This next one is a 3v1. There is some kind of PvE craziness as well here with the giant Erdtree Guardian there, but I am able to get in a hit, and then I do take some damage from this Colossal Sword, but I'm able to recover to mostly full health and just get in a quick light attack with the Unsheath and manage to kill that opponent. I would say a common approach with Unsheath as an Ash of War that I would recommend is if you can get a couple light attacks in with just the Nagakiba and get their damage down to maybe 75%. You can often roll catch out of your light attacks with Unsheath and take away the rest of their 75% health or 50% or whatever they have left, because it just does so much damage. And that's part of the reason I wanted to switch to the Dragonscale setup when it's just a one-on-one, because using Unsheath in a one-on-one scenario is, I mean, you can definitely do it, but it might end the fight a little bit more quickly and doesn't really demonstrate the power of these weapons. So there I'm able to get a crouching attack with the Dragonscale blades, and they're good in terms of damage output, but they really lack range that I find to be necessary in multi-opponent situations, especially because they have low poise damage. So if you have a short range weapon with low poise damage, I would say you're probably going to be struggling to win some of your invasions, and it's going to be much more useful to have something that does a little bit more poise damage or has a little bit more range, and I felt like that's where the Nagakiba did a great job of kind of filling that void. So this next one, we have a 2v1 that was a little bit rough. We have Moonveil involved, which is you know, pretty intense, especially at this level. It can do a lot of damage, but they definitely invested more of their stats into their damage output than their own health, which you know, is something we see a lot in this game, but it meant that I'm able to deliver a Unsheath kill for, you know, 700-ish damage and finish them off pretty quickly. So once I kind of got out of the high pressure scenario of the chase down from both opponents and get myself some space, I'm able to take care of first the Phantom and then get a guard break on the host, which allows me to get a nice riposte there and just kind of finish off that situation. And that's something I noticed a lot at this level compared to, say, like 70 or 80. Once you're dealing with the higher damage associated with meta level, your mistakes are going to be much more costly, and your windows of opportunity for high burst damage are going to be much more important. So if you can kind of deliver that burst damage in those, you know, opportune moments, then you're going to be in a good spot, but you might die pretty quickly. You know, if you spawn in and you're kind of off on the back foot and just trying to get away, if your opponents are effectively chasing you down, it's much more likely that you'll die in the process than win. So that was just something I noticed. I'm not sure what rune level I'll, you know, continue with invasions at. I've always kind of liked 80 as just kind of a sweet spot, or 70 around there. But if people are more interested in like 125, 137, 150 even, you can definitely let me know. I think it's an interesting play style to invade at that level, but I think you can be a little bit more experimental and have a little bit more fun at some of the lower levels. So that's, you know, just information I'd love to hear back about, is where you would like to see builds in the future. I have no problem invading really at any level. I think it's a lot of fun in most cases, but you know, once you approach the higher damage output, I think your strategy needs to change a little bit, and what becomes viable is a little bit different. So that's a little bit of a tangent here, but I just wanted to mention that that's something that I think about, and if you have strong opinions either way, I'm happy to hear them. So this invasion was not so bad. It was somebody else with the Nagakiba, and they had Spinning Slash on it, which is really strong because the weapon just comes with so much range. And I am able to land the Ash of War with the Dragonscale Blade, which I ended up doing kind of more than I thought I would. mostly because I didn't think I would really be able to land it at all. So having landed it a couple times, I was pretty happy, but I'm mostly in this case using it as a buff. And once it's a one-on-one situation, I feel like it's safe to, kind of buff both my weapons. I also wanted to mention too that we are going to be using lightning damage, so we're going to have split damage, which means that if you are able to frostbite your opponent, you're going to be able to get a little bit more damage output from your weapons because their physical and lightning defenses are going to be lower. So I definitely recommend the frost damage. So using freezing pots are a great way to do it, but also because this is ice lightning, it does have the potential to frostbite your opponents, which is going to be really nice. And I found that it didn't happen super frequently. It's much faster if you can just land a freezing pot, but it's very noticeable to the damage output that you get when your opponent is frostbitten or not. And it can be a great way to kind of mix up the scenario and give yourself a little bit more of an advantage. I also found that frequently people would not use a bolus after they had been frostbit. I think it's not super common to see people appreciating that aspect of strategy, and they kind of just ignore it. So that's just a recommendation that I have. I know I've talked about that before in the past, but for a build any build that's split damage, really, I think using freezing pots is a great option, and they're not super difficult to farm. And I think it just takes 2 of 1 ingredient. So I like them a lot. I think they're pretty practical and something I would recommend for most builds. So this one is a 3v1. It kind of started out as a 2v1, and then somebody else came in as the other person died, so it's kind of like 2 consecutive 2v1s. The host is not doing a great job of helping out their phantom, sending those discs as I'm going for the chase down. It's not something I would recommend. They should really be trying to apply pressure, maybe land a jumping attack on me, and I am able to finally get the chase down there and kind of grab a backstab from the sort of Night and Flame Ash of War that we see from the host. And then they're kind of on their back foot. They do have regen, which I think, it works pretty quickly, but I'm not sure if they're out of heals or what, but I think continuously aggressing me is probably not the play on their part. The Sword of Night and Flame, I think, is really powerful in multiple opponent situations if you're on the side with teammates, but it is kind of a slow Ash of War. Unless you're going to be free aiming it or using it somewhat unpredictably, I don't think you're really going to be feeling the benefits of it, and it's honestly going to put you in a position where you're stuck in animations longer than is useful. So I'm able to take care of that phantom, or that host rather, and it works out pretty well in my favor there. Next up we have a 2v1. I kind of like this particular invasion on this location. There was a giant skeleton behind me that was shooting some magic originally, so I think the phantom and the host were not interested in getting super close to me. We do have somebody else with a katana, and I wasn't sure what Ash of War they had. I was playing kind of hesitantly because I wasn't sure if it was going to be Moonveil or not. When you see that Unsheathe animation, it's always, you just need to be careful, because if it is Moonveil, your playstyle is going to be a little bit different. But they actually do land 2 Unsheathed Ashes of War on me, but aren't really doing so much damage. So I think I kind of lucked out in that situation where they weren't doing a ton of damage, but that also influenced my playstyle. I knew that I wasn't going to get chunked, so I could be a little bit more aggressive, which was useful in this scenario for sure. And the person, I don't think really either of these players were super optimized for PvP, which meant the approach that I took could be a little bit different. I went for a backstab attempt there after the Taker's Flame Ash of War, but wasn't able to grab it. But I do land my Unsheath, which hits both of them and just does a ton of damage, and then switch over to the Dragonscale Blades. I need to restore my FP real quick just so I can buff the second one, and now I feel like I'm in a good spot to go for the chase down here. And I do manage to get out a crouching L1 that comes out slightly faster than the Unsheathed Ash of War that my opponent is using, and that's enough to stun lock them and pretty much get them into a position where I can really just finish them off. And it's pretty effective usage of that crouch attack. So I recommend that crouch attack quite a bit. It's really nice to be able to get both weapons to hit simultaneously, especially with something that's so quick. However, it's worth noting that you want to be like really close to your opponent, especially if you're going to be using dual Dragonscale blades, because if you're not so close, then you're probably going to whiff. It doesn't have a ton of range with those two weapons, and using dual Nabakibas might be a slightly better way to deliver those crouching attacks, but for this build, we wanted to include the Dragonscale Blade, so I just went for something that, was a little bit closer, and especially if somebody rolls into you, if you can delay it towards the end of the roll and go for that crouch attack, you're going to be able to hit for pretty high damage. So this next one is a 3v1, and I was a little bit unsure about who the host was and who wasn't, and here I end up making a mistake and unsheath on what I thought was the host, but it turned out not to be. So I was kind of surprised. I retreated a little bit and just kind of regrouped, wanted to get some health and then buff my weapons, and I kind of gave my host a little bit too long to die to the PvE that's over there, so I wasn't able to grab the 3 kills, but the PvE just kind of helped me out there and it worked out in my favor. Next up we have a 2v1, and I felt this was just kind of a fun invasion. We have the dual twin blades set up and then somebody with the pokes. I go for the Phantom first, per usual, and manage to get a Unsheath Ash of War that takes care of the last bit of their health there, and then it's just a one-on-one with a Rune Arc person with a Halberd. I would say the Halberd is definitely a good counter to the Nagakiba. It's long range, does more poise damage, and depending on which Halberd you have, you might have access to the overhead downward slash, which is on the Knight Rider glaive. So I like that as a way to vary up the attacks, but it's certainly good to have the pokes as well. But I am able to use the just speed of the Nagakiba to get a couple quick hits off. This next one I also thought was kind of funny. So one, I just love the animation of these blades if you are going up an elevator, and that was something that I just kind of wanted to note. I think it looks really cool, and the lightning goes all the way to the ground. And this was just the second half of an invasion where the first Phantom died pretty quick and I was beginning the chase down, and I just wanted to say, like, it's really important to have headphones on with directional hearing, because in that moment I heard the host healing there, and that allowed me to turn around and kind of see that they were putting on their Mimic Veil, and I probably would have spent a while looking for them. So I land the Ash of War with the Dragonscale Blade and then grab the backstab off of Taker's Flame. So just a successful moment there, and a shout out to headphones with directional hearing, because they are pretty nice in terms of knowing what's going on around you in invasions. And honestly, if you invade a lot, I would say they're kind of a must-have. If you can get the 3D audio, then you'll be really in business, but at least having left and right hearing and not just listening to your audio out of speakers is going to be useful in situations like that. So this next one is a 2v1. The Phantom goes down pretty quick, and then we begin the chase down process. This is going to be one example where I find that an Ash of War is actually pretty useful for a chase down process. Not so many of them are because of the long windup, but for Unsheath on the Nagakiba, you get enough range to really be able to get that full long arc that results in a high damage chase down successful kill. So that one was just kind of a quick example of that, and pretty useful in my opinion. Next up we have a 2v1, and this one was kind of interesting. We had a host that went down very quickly, and then we had a Rune Arced host that has a Halberd set up as well as a flail in the offhand, and they will be switching over to a dual flail setup, which I thought was pretty fun. I've messed around with flails a little bit, and they're really just not good. And to opt for that, I think is cool. It's a fun approach, but definitely not what I would recommend. So I have a little bit of an issue with my weapon swapping here, but I do go for the dual Dragonscale blades and just get those buffed real quick, and I think that will be kind of an even match here for the flails and the katanas here. The flails will have a little bit more poison damage, I believe, but the quickness and range of the katanas will be a little bit better. So I get some phantom hits on my opponent, which does build up their frostbite bar. That ends up being useful. I don't think I get the frostbite proc on them, but I do get the proc, but none of the damage. I think they roll the damage in just a moment here, and that means my damage output is going to be bigger for the rest of the invasion, and I think that does end up being felt towards the end here. So they start backing off. They switch back over to their halberd, which I don't blame them for, but I think it ended up potentially changing up the rhythm a little bit. They back off to heal and then continuously go for pokes while they're kind of off the initiative, I would say. So I'm able to deliver a couple quick L1s and finish off the kill. This next one was a 2v1 that was definitely scary. I think I played it a little risky here, but it's 2 Rivers of Blood users in a pretty narrow hallway. So I'm going to be trying to focus on using my Ash of War to get big burst damage. The animation for Rivers of Blood does, I think, allow an opportunity for you to land a Unsheath heavy attack. So you can space that correctly, I believe, if you kind of wait for their second attack to finish, and then if they go for the third, that might give you an opening to get in there with your Ash of War. And then there I almost die, just have a little bit of health left, but I'm able to get out of there and back off a little bit. Also use a Blood Bolus to get rid of my bleed meter, and now I feel like I'm kind of in a good spot. I land a light attack and then go for an L1 and manage to get a couple hits in to finish off the host there. So that was a little nerve-wracking, definitely one of the scarier invasion situations that I've experienced with this showcase, but managed to come out with the W, which was nice. Next up we have a 3v1 that really made me happy, mostly because of this particular phantom that blows themselves up with their mixed physic and then fat rolls away as I begin the chase down. So a bold play to be sure. Didn't really work out this time, but I'd love to see them continue that approach, and maybe they'll land it in the future. We also do have some magic spam from the Halo Scythe. That I find to be very easy to parry with Carry and Retaliation, but it's also extremely frustrating in multi-opponent situations. I think if the tendency is to try to get up close to it while it's still happening, but if you don't stun lock your opponent early enough, and the fact that the spell kind of stays present for a period of time in the same spot means that you can still get hit by it even after you've stun locked your opponent, and it has the potential to do really big damage, especially with overleveled phantoms. So I've just found that being aggressive towards it is never the play, in my opinion, if they're kind of continuously sending them your way, and using something like Carry and Retaliation to stun lock them from a distance, or just throwing a freezing pot or something is going to be a much better option. That didn't end up being necessary in this scenario, but I just wanted to mention that there. This next one, I do switch over to the charm that will raise my focus, because I thought I saw Madness Spear, but I think I just mistook the Tree Spear, or I'm not sure what that halberd is called, but maybe it's a sword spear. I'm not sure. One of the halberds though for a Madness Spear, and so I switched back once I realized that it wasn't actually something that was going to do Madness buildup, but definitely something I recommend with this build. If you're going to be wearing this mask to raise your dexterity, you need to just be aware of the detriment that it comes to your focus, and Madness is strong, so is Sleep, so just being aware of that I think is important, especially if I'm going to be recommending it in a build. And I'm able to take care of one of the phantoms, then it turns back into a 2v1, and we do have some interesting plays with the frostbite there. I think that was kind of cool. I go in for a jumping attack, delay it, I think a little bit too much, which was to my detriment. I think I should have tried to get that out as early as possible, and then managed to land it Unsheath, and there's a very sympathetic phantom that just feels very bad for the host, I'm sure. So that one ended up working out well. I would have preferred to get the phantom first, but sometimes, especially when you're going for burst damage, you don't really end up with a choice in terms of who you hit and who you kill. So that was all right, but it just kind of worked out like that. And then here we do have an instance where we have Vike Spears. So I managed to kill the Phantom before the Madness build-up is too big, but it is decently high. So I get a little bit worried about this. I think I probably should have switched quicker, but I swap off my helm and then switch over to the Talisman here. And you can see how much more sleep and madness buildup I'll be allowed to have. Probably the right play there would have been to use a bolus to get rid of the whole madness buildup, but I was able to take care of the host before that became an issue. So just a recommendation there, and I think that's something in general that should be talked about more, or at least something that I'm going to be trying to use in my builds more, is to just counter these specific status procs a little bit more intentionally. So regardless of the helm that I'm wearing, I think I want to integrate that charm talisman into my builds and just utilize it more frequently, because having a bigger bar and being less prone to madness or sleep is going to be useful. This next one was a 3v1 that was really just 3 consecutive 1v1s, which was kind of cool. I definitely enjoy invading a group of 3 that's fine with doing individual fights. I don't want to experience that always. I think it's more fun to have multi-opponent situations, but it can be fun to just, kind of one after the other to see what you can do. In some of my other videos, you've seen, though, that doesn't always work out super honorably. Sometimes you'll have people that are willing to do one-on-one fights for a period of time until it looks like somebody's losing, and then they'll go for, 2-on-1, 3-on-1 situations, depending on the kind of changing of the tide. So always something to be wary of, but it was definitely fun in this scenario. The first 2 phantoms I took care of pretty quickly. I think they weren't expecting the damage output from Unsheathe, and that really worked in my favor. But then the phantom did a great job here, or the host rather did a great job here of using Radon swords, which I typically don't think are too solid, but they managed to hit me a couple times with quite a lot of damage output. They weren't spamming their Ash of War, which would have left them open to backstabs, and I'm a little bit worried in this situation. I think I'm 1 hit from death, and we don't end up finding out, but they are too, so I managed to kind of change up the rhythm of my light attacks and get that kill in there. So definitely a nice moment there, and just speaks to the utility of the Nagakiba. Next up, we have an invasion that I felt was indicative of invading at this level, where you have the damage output of level 100 and higher, but you have the vigor levels of much lower. So that's something that I did experience a lot when I was trying to get clips for this specific build, was just people dying so quickly. And just a quick PSA to everybody out there that regardless of your build, if you're going to be in the plus 100s, you should have at least 1500 HP, however you need to do that, and probably no sore seals if you can avoid it. So this next one was a 2v1, and I thought it was interesting just in perspective of zoning. So we do have this trap that is blowing the frostbite air around, and I think that's kind of useful in terms of separating the phantom from the host, and that ends up being useful, allowing me to get some space to land my Ash of War. And then I put this pillar back up and then jump over to the side with the host, giving them slightly less room to avoid me, and I'm able to guard break them and deliver a couple quick hits with the Nagakiba. I do accidentally hit clap there. I wasn't trying to be rude in that instance and try to recover with a different emote, but sometimes that does happen. I guess it's better than a point down. Well, I don't know. You can be the judge of that. Next up, we have a 2v1, and this one was pretty solid in terms of just a quick chase down, getting the Ash of War off early with Unsheath on the Phantom, and then we'd be in a position, if we wanted to switch over to the Dragonscale Blade. I can't remember off the top of my head. If I do, it looks like I do not. So there was just another quick example of people that didn't really work together well as a team, and that allowed me to just kind of utilize the burst damage of this build in a pretty successful way. So this next one, we have a 3v1, and this was a nice example of, well, one, I would say that was a misplay. I should have continued to aggress my opponent, but I was a little bit wary when I saw the 2 other people there, and I think that I probably could have gotten the first Phantom kill in right then and there if I'd stayed aggressive, but I decided to play it a little bit more safe and regroup. They come down the hallway with the Eleanor's Pole Blade Ash of War, which I think was a great move. I see that my blood meter is pretty high, so I go for a heal and use one. a blood bolus that is, and that puts me in a kind of better position to reset. I'm pretty sure that we're going to have somebody hiding behind the door, so that allows me to give someone to approach quickly, and then the phantoms do kind of a poor job of just protecting that other player. I think they needed to be more aggressive in that instance. So I go for the other phantom that has the watchdog weapon. I can't remember what that staff is called exactly. Maybe it's just the watchdog staff, but it's not going to be great in a scenario where you have somebody with pretty quick weapons, because it's going to come out a little bit slowly and be easy to dodge. So I'm able to get that chase down there, and then it's just the Eleanor's pole blade person left, and I'm trying to get the Ash of War off with the Ice Lightning sword to allow them to land their Ash of War into the lightning explosion, but I don't quite get the timing right, so it ended up being a little bit of a waste of a heal, I would say, but just for the learning process, I'd say it's always worth it to give it a try if you think that you're going to be all right. And then I go for an Unsheathed Ash of War, and to my surprise, they also don't have too much health, so it just kind of finished them off there. Next, we have a 2v1 against a person in Bull Goat, and I'm pretty sure that they're over leveled just based on the amount of damage that I'm doing, and their setup, it looks like pretty heavy, and you know, it just, I don't know, sometimes you get a feel that the person you're fighting is a little bit over leveled. So they have Moonveil, which I'm a little bit worried about, but I'm able to kind of go for a chase down here. They get distracted by the PvE, and then I get a nice kind of roll catch there with the Unsheath heavy attack, and that just turns it into a 1v1. I let them kill the PvE while they go for the buff and go for some jumping attacks. I do have my offhand buffed, so I want to kind of use that as much as possible in this scenario. So I go for more L1s than I might normally, and it ends up being pretty useful. You can see that the damage output is higher for my offhand, which is, you know, it makes sense. You don't have quite as much range, and it ends up being pretty useful. And last up, we have a invasion that doesn't involve any of the weapons involved, but it is just kind of a fun jar cannon invasion that I had during the course of this build creation. So I'm going to take this as an opportunity just to talk about this build in general. I would say overall it's pretty viable at meta level. Using Unsheath on the Nagakiba is going to be good. It's going to be strong. You get the range that you'd want. You get the poise damage that you would want with a weapon like this. So having something with range and poise damage, I think, is going to allow you to really take care of the worst aspects of ganks at this level, and then you can turn it into something that's a little bit more balanced in terms of burst damage, where you have the dual shorter range Dragonscale swords if you want to. And I think that was a fun approach. So I would say this is definitely a viable build for meta. And in terms of fun, I would say it's not the most fun build that I've ever used, but it is like a solid approach. And it is interesting to incorporate the frostbite damage with the ice lightning that you get from the Dragonscale build, or sword, that is. So having frostbite mixed with lightning, I think, is pretty cool, and they really pair well together since you are doing split damage with all of your weapons. So definitely something that I would say is worth a try and is practical at meta level. I think this build would also be solid at, you know, level 80 or 60 if you wanted to, but you wouldn't get quite as much damage output, which, you know, is totally expected. So I definitely like this build. It's not as fun, I think, as some of my other builds, like, you know, poison anything really. I always come back to poison as just a build type that I really enjoy. I just think it's so much fun. And I would say, you know, if you're looking for something solid but with a slight twist on it, this would be a good setup for pretty much any level range. And yeah, that's all I've got to say about this particular weapon and build. And in just a moment, the jar cannon will do its job and we'll get another successful invasion. If you made it this far, I just wanted to say thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate everybody who's been contributing to watch time, liking, subscribing, all that good stuff. And I feel like there's some more participation in the comments as well, and that's really cool to see. I like hearing from everybody just with what they think of this build series that I've been working on and just builds they've been using or builds they'd like to see. So yeah, that's all I've got, and I hope you have a good one.